In the dead of night, the man's eyes snapped open to the faintest sound, a soft rustling near the small cot where the child lay curled, asleep. His hand instinctively moved to the worn rifle propped against the rough wooden wall of the cabin. Outside, the wind whispered through the skeletal trees, carrying the distant echo of dangers that had stalked these lands for generations. He had promised himself and the child safety within these trembling walls, but the night held secrets darker than the cold biting at his skin. The cabin stood alone amid the sprawling wilderness of the frontier. A fragile sanctuary carved by human hands against an indifferent world. The pale moonlight filtered through cracks in the timber, casting long, uncertain shadows over the sparse furnishings and the faint outlines of dried grass pressed beneath the cabin's floorboards. Beyond the thin shelter, endless plains stretched toward jagged mountains, silent witnesses to relentless struggles between men torn by fear and fury, and the Apache spirits woven into this unforgiving terrain. He sat motionless, breath steady but heart pounding, his eyes fixed on the sleeping child, whose every soft breath was a fragile hope in a world scorched by conflict. The child's dark hair spilled over a worn blanket, small hands clenched protectively to a ragged toy, a lone figure amidst the encroaching chaos. This orphan, this thread of innocence, had come to him shrouded in whispered stories of lost kin and hunted shadows. Now, the man bore the silent weight of a vow he could not break, to shield this child at all costs. But the frontier was deaf to promises. The night held no guarantees. A sudden chill passed as the man's gaze drifted beyond the cabin's meager defenses. Faint impressions in the soft earth outside the window caught his eye. Barefoot prints encircling the child's humble bed. The worn circles disrupted the fragile peace like a whispered threat carried on the wind. Whoever had come so close while the child slept had slipped through the night's veil unnoticed, moving with the quiet patience of a predator. Fear tightened its grip within him, tempered by a surge of resolve. These tracks could belong to friend or foe, an ally lost in the tangle of uncertain loyalties, or a hidden enemy waiting for dawn's first light to strike. The man's mind raced through memories of past hunts and betrayals etched in the scars of his flesh and soul. Trust here was as fleeting as the flames in the hearth that struggled to fend off the darkness. His rough hand brushed the child's hair back from the forehead, tracing the stubborn pulse of life against a world that sought to snuff it out. The child stirred, eyes opening slowly, wide with the raw mixture of innocence and awakened fear. Words were unnecessary, understandings formed in silent glances, a shared heartbeat against the silence. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying with it an ominous cloak of shadows, closing in, closer than before. The man rose, planting his boots firmly on the creaking floor, muscles coiled like the wire of his rifle. Every sense sharpened to the barest whisper, a snapped twig, a distant howl, the unmistakable sound of footsteps, heavy and deliberate. The threat was no longer a shadow beyond the horizon. It was here, around them, circling unseen, Dawn would bring no warmth, only the stark reality of danger pressed to wooden walls, testing the fragile bond between protector and child. The man's gaze lingered on the prints once more, those silent footprints, barefoot on earth, an echo of arrival, a warning written in the dust. In that moment, the fragile shelter poised on the edge of violence and desperation. In the cold breath of morning, a deadly game began. Many among those who follow our tales across these forgotten lands have told us that the winds of fate, or that sly YouTube algorithm, sometimes steal away their subscriptions without warning. Before the next perilous path unfolds and another twist arrives, take a quick moment below this video and make sure you're still counted among our band. We don't want you to miss a single voice echoing from this valley. Check your subscription now and join our saga. The cabin's shadows lengthened as the man's breath tightened and his gaze fixed fiercely on the faint, barefoot tracks outside. They pressed close, as if the night itself conspired with silent footsteps that had slipped past the fragile defenses, like a ghost armed with intent. He gripped his rifle tighter, every muscle taut beneath worn leather and calloused skin, the weight of years pressing into the present moment. The child stirred again, fragile and trembling, eyes wide and uncertain in the dim light. The man's voice was low, threaded with a quiet urgency that held no room for lies or reassurances better left unspoken. "You stay close," he whispered, brushing the damp hair from the child's brow, his fingers trembling despite the resolve burning in his chest. "Whatever's out there, we won't let it take you." The wind shifted beyond the cabin walls, carrying a breath colder and heavier than before, a spectral warning tangled with the scent of wood smoke and distant pine. His ears caught the subtle scratch of gravel, the soft scuff of earth, disturbed not far from the door. Every nerve screamed for action, for movement, for some salvation in the stark wilderness, threatening to swallow them whole. Outside, the forest whispered secrets longer than time could measure, a tapestry woven with the spirits of Apache ancestors who had danced with the wind and learned the language of shadows. The man remembered whispered tales told by those who straddled two worlds, the fierce pride mingled with deep wounds that no gunshot could erase. But the land was unforgiving tonight. No place for mercy, only for silence and sharp survival. The cabin's door creaked slightly, the sound a brittle thread pulled tight between hope and dread. He shifted forward, rifle poised, hearing the careful breathing of the child mingling with his own. Then a soft pause, a hesitation closer to the door than he dared imagine. "Who's there?" His voice was gravel and steel, barely more than a challenge thrown into the foggy night. A shadow moved just beyond the threshold, delicate yet deliberate. Not a man, not quite. Something that carried the quiet strength of survival, wrapped in the folds of a worn blanket and the faint, distinct scent of sage and earth. He caught the flash of dark eyes, sharp, wary, yet flickering with a fragile trust not given lightly. "Wait!" the figure whispered in a voice no louder than the breeze slipping past the eaves. I come with peace, no harm. The man's grip faltered for one heartbeat. The child reached out instinctively, clutching the stranger's sleeve, a silent plea, a frozen hope. Years of suspicion warred with a sudden surge of compassion. Then prove it, the man said, lowering his rifle cautiously, but not relinquishing his guard. The figure stepped inside, revealing the worn face of a young Apache woman, her dark hair falling loose beneath a hood mottled with shadow. Her eyes, bright and tired, met his with the quiet burden of stories unspoken. "We've been hunted," she said, voice tight with remembered horrors. "They come for my people. I escaped, but the others, they did not." Her gaze flicked toward the child, this fragile beacon caught in a storm that showed no mercy. "I know of your promise. The child, he, is not safe. Not here, not without the truth." A cold shiver slithered down the man's spine as the weight of those words settled like dust. "The truth?" He motioned for her to sit near the fading firelight. "Then speak it. But know this, any lie will be the last." Her hands trembled as she produced a faded cloth, carefully unfolding it, to reveal a worn drawing of twisted shapes and faded marks, maps and warnings from her people, a trail of blood traced across the land. "There's a patrol," she confided. "Patrol led by men who don't care what's right or who's innocent. They hunt not only for my tribe, but for anyone who stands between them and control. Your child belongs to a legacy they wish to erase." Silence crashed into the cabin like thunder. The man swallowed the lump in his throat, the cold reality piercing through years of rough survival. This was not just a fight for life. It was a war for the soul hidden beneath the dust and gunfire. "I kept my word." The man's voice was raw, brimming with the quiet fury of a protector betrayed. But now, it seems, the storm cannot be outrun. The Apache woman nodded, eyes shadowed with both grief and resolve. "We must move. They will come before daylight. But out there," she pointed toward the horizon, darkened by jagged peaks, "is a place where old spirits still watch, and where even the fiercest hunters hesitate." The child clung tighter to the man's side, eyelashes fluttering with exhaustion and fear, yet a faint spark of courage kindled deep within. The bond forged between protector and child grew heavier with every whispered secret, and every breath held against the oncoming tempest. Minutes passed like a drawn breath held too long. Every crack in the floor, every sliver of moonlight that sliced through the cabin walls, became a messenger of doom or hope. Undecided, the man turned slowly to the woman, voice low and burdened. "Tell me this. Can the child survive what's coming? Can the land that has drowned so many offer sanctuary to one more soul?" She looked toward the sleeping forest, a silent prayer passing her lips. "If the spirits will it, yes. But the patrol does not seek dead men alone. They want an end to all that defies their claim. You must decide, trust the wild or face the storm in this fragile shell." The soft flicker of dawn's first light dared to touch the farthest edge of the mountains. Outside, shapes moved, figures cloaked in the ragged silhouettes of menace, their breaths visible in the cold air. The encroaching threat was no longer distant, but tangible. A tightening noose drawn steadily around the cabin and its endangered souls. The man's hand found the child's again. "We leave, now," he said through clenched teeth. "No more hiding." As the door quietly slid open, the night surrendered to a harrowing silence, one that whispered of battles to come, of choices carved in blood and bone, and of a fragile hope forged in the union of two worlds. But before they could cross the threshold into uncertain salvation, a sudden, sharp crack shattered the stillness. A bullet punched through the air, splintering the wooden wall mere inches from their heads. The Apache woman's eyes flashed in bitter surprise, and then, with a voice stark as winter steel, she hissed, "They found us, and this time they're not alone." A bullet tore through the air, splintering the cabin wall mere inches from their heads, the sharp crack echoing like a death knell in the still morning silence. The man threw himself forward, dragging the child down behind the wooden table, whose legs groaned under the sudden weight. The Apache woman pressed her back against the far wall, eyes flashing with bitter alarm. "They found us, and this time they're not alone." Outside, the ragged silhouettes of men moved like shadows melting from the trees. Their boots crushed dry leaves and snapped brittle branches as they closed in. A hunting pack fueled by relentless purpose. The man's hand clenched the rifle tighter, finger pulsing on the trigger, as his mind raced. Every moment could mean the difference between life and death. For him, for the child, for the fragile hope clinging to these battered walls. The child whimpered softly, pressing closer into the man's side, his breath uneven and trembling. The man's eyes burned with fierce resolve, shielding the boy's small form with his own, as if his very bones could hold back the coming storm. "They'll break in," the Apache woman whispered. "We have little time. Hide the child." The man nodded, voice low but urgent. "Follow me." They moved swiftly, the cabin's cramped space swallowing their haste. Beneath the floorboards, a hollowed space had been carved, a narrow, dark refuge where the child could be concealed from sight, where silence was their only armor. The man gently deposited the sleeping boy into the secret hollow, brushing the damp curls from his forehead one last time. "You'll stay quiet," he urged softly, "no matter what you hear." The child's wide eyes met his, sparkling with trust despite dawning fear. Then came the crash. The cabin door shuddered under the force of a battering ram, splinters exploding into the air like fireflies scattered by a stone. The man rose from the floorboards, just as the door burst open, the flood of cold dawn spilling into the battered room. A group of grim-faced men poured inside, faces hard and unyielding beneath the brim of battered hats. The leader, a hulking figure, scarred by years in the unforgiving wilds, stepped forward, eyes narrowing on the two who stood between him and his prey. The man's rifle found its mark, a thunderous bark that cracked the thinning winter air. A cry split the chaos as the leader staggered, clutching his shoulder, where blood seeped steadily through tattered leather. But the others surged forward, reckless and angry, swallow the distance between hunter and hunted with brutal force. The fight was raw and desperate, the clash of wills carved into every grunt, every slam of fists against bone, every echo of gunfire bouncing off the cabin walls. The man moved like a tempest fueled by primal fear and fierce love, guarding his charge with all that remained unbroken within him. Amid the fray, the Apache woman's eyes flickered to the open woods beyond. A distant howl tore through the cold morning, a reminder that this land belonged not only to those who wielded guns, but to the spirits woven through stone, tree, and wind. Her lips pressed tight as the weight of that legacy settled on her shoulders. One of the men lunged for the rifle. She met him with a swift, brutal strike that sent him crashing into the rough logs. The fight spun into chaos, faces contorted with rage, bodies stained with dirt and blood. But beneath it all, a fierce determination pulsed through the cabin. Suddenly, a sharp cry broke free, the child screaming, his voice a desperate thread slicing through the madness. The man's head snapped toward the shadowed corner, where the secret hollow lay cracked open. The child's wide eyes reflected terror and confusion as he scrambled backward, stumbling into the floor's jagged edge. The leader, bloodied but far from finished, seized the moment. He roared, "Get that brat!" and surged toward the boy with deadly intent. Steel met steel as the man intercepted, slamming the leader to the floor. The daughter of the earth's wild bones shouted an unearthly call, a sharp, piercing note that seemed to slice through the chaos itself. For a heartbeat, the forest stilled. The men faltered, unease rippling through their ranks. The man seized the pause. "Run!" he barked to the Apache woman, who scooped the child into her arms without hesitation. They darted toward the shattered doorway, heartbeats hammering in deadly cadence. As they crossed the threshold, a cold wind surged, swirling dust and leaves into a frenzy. Shapes emerged from the trees, figures cloaked in worn blankets, faces painted with streaks of earth and ash, eyes gleaming with ancient fire. The spirits of the land had answered the call. The chasing men hesitated, fear glimmered in their eyes as the line between mortal and legend blurred beneath the watching peaks. But then a thunderous crack cut through the tense silence, a rifle shot from the rear. One of the pursuers fell, clutching a shattered arm, snarling curses into the frozen air. The man lowered himself behind a broken tree trunk, breath ragged. He turned to the woman and the child, the weight of the moment pressing heavy. "We're not out of this," he murmured, voice thick with exhaustion and resolve. "They'll hunt us until either we break or they do." She nodded, eyes blazing. "The land hides us now, but soon we must face more than men. There is a darkness coming that even the spirits fear to challenge." The child blinked up at them, small fingers clutching tightly to the rough blanket draped over his mother's shoulders. Out on the horizon, the jagged mountains caught the first cold light of dawn, casting long, unforgiving shadows. The man's gaze hardened. The fragile sanctuary they had known was gone, consumed by the trail and fire. And beneath the falling light, a figure whispered through the trees, worn leather boots brushing the frost, silent as death. A new enemy watched, waiting. A smoke flare arced low against the pale sky, an urgent signal that carried with it the promise of reinforcements. The man's heart sank with the weight of a new nightmare born from the gathering dawn. A sharp crack shattered the quiet morning, a bullet splintering the cabin's worn wall mere inches from their heads. The man lunged forward, dragging the child beneath the wooden table, just as the door exploded inward. Sunlight, cold and relentless, spilled across the battered floorboards, chasing away the fragile shadows they had clung to. More shapes poured through the broken threshold, grim men with hard eyes and hands eager for blood. Their leader, hulking and scarred like the unforgiving land itself, stepped forward, the pain blooming across his shoulder from the man's shot, barely slowing his advance. The man's breath was ragged but steady, every muscle coiled to strike. His gaze flickered to the child, whose small body trembled against his side. The fragile promise they had tried to hold against the darkness was now a desperate heartbeat. Beneath the violent storm, "They'll break in," whispered the Apache woman, barely audible over the chaos. "Hide him!" Without hesitation, the man swept the child toward the corner, revealing the narrow hollow beneath the floorboards, a secret refuge carved by hope and fear. The boy's wide eyes met his for a fleeting moment, filled with innocent terror and a sliver of trust. The man pressed a rough finger to his lips. "Quiet. No matter what comes, you keep still." The wooden door groaned under the weight of the battering ram again, splinters rattling like fractured bones. The man rose, rifle poised like a thunderbolt, ready to unleash. The attackers surged forward, reckless fury in every step. The fight erupted with brutal urgency, the clash of fists, and gunfire echoing off the cabin walls, a desperate dance between survival and death. The man moved with the raw force of a cornered beast, every strike protecting the fragile life hidden just feet away. The Apache woman was no less fierce, each blow from her a whispered legacy of her people's fierce spirits, striking down a man with a stunned cry. Amid the chaos, the child's scream pierced the air, a sharp, breaking sound slicing through the brutality. The hollow's hidden door was cracked open too wide. The boy stumbled into the jagged edge, eyes wide with terror. The leader roared and lunged forward, bloodied but fueled by ruthless hatred. The man intercepted, slamming him back with an unforgiving force, as the woman's voice rang out, a piercing call carrying through the chaos like a blade cutting smoke. For a heartbeat, the attackers faltered, their faces etched with unease. The forest outside seemed to hold its breath, as if the ancient spirits themselves were watching. "Run!" the man shouted, seizing the moment. The woman swept the child into her arms, and together they darted toward the shattered cabin door. Outside, the cold wind whipped dust and leaves into a swirling frenzy. Figures emerged from the trees, faces painted with earth and ash, eyes gleaming like embers in the morning light. The land's guardians had answered the call. The men hesitated, shadows of fear flickering in their eyes, as worlds, old and unseen, stirred just beyond mortal reach. But then, a rifle's sharp crack shattered the fragile truce. One of the pursuers crumpled, clutching a broken arm, curses spat into the freezing air. Behind the cover of a fallen tree, the man crouched, breath ragged, but eyes blazing unwavering resolve. He looked to the woman and child, the weight of the battlefield heavy on his shoulders. "They won't stop," he breathed, voice thick with exhaustion and fierce devotion. "They'll hunt us until there's nothing left." Her gaze hardened, shadows flickering deep in the dark pools of her eyes. "The land shelters us for now, but a darker storm is gathering, one no spirit dares face." The child clung tightly to the rough blanket draped over her shoulders, innocence trembling on a knife's edge. Beyond the jagged peaks, dawn stretched long arms of pale light across the world, unforgiving and stark. The man's jaw clenched. Their sanctuary was ash now, swallowed by betrayal and the cold fury of men, driven by greed and hate. In the gathering light, footsteps slicked soft as death beneath the frost-covered brush. A silent watcher stepped from the trees, worn leather boots barely stirring the ground, eyes cold and sharp like a hawk's. Across the pale sky, a flare hissed low and swift, an urgent summons carried by the wind, whispering of reinforcements amassing in the shadows. The man's heart faltered as a bleak knowing settled deep within. A storm far worse than any they'd faced was stalking them, drawn nearer with every breath of the breaking day. A bullet tore through the air, shattering the cabin wall inches above them. The man's reflexes snapped tight. He lunged forward, hauling the child behind the sturdy wooden table. The room erupted, the door splintering apart in a violent rush of cold morning light and the pounding footsteps of men hungry for blood. The leader's grim shadow pushed past the threshold, shoulder bleeding where the man's bullet had caught him. Yet his glare burned with deadly intent. Despite the chaos, the man's breath remained steady, muscles coiled, every sense razor-sharp. The child trembled against his side, small and vulnerable, a fragile ember clinging to life amid the storm. The man's hand found the child's, squeezing it with fierce determination. "Hide," the Apache woman whispered urgently, voice a thread amidst the crashing turmoil. Guided by years of survival, the man swept the boy toward the corner where a hidden hollow beneath the floorboards awaited, a carved refuge known only to a desperate few. The boy's wide eyes locked with his, filled with a mixture of terror and fragile trust. The man pressed a calloused finger to his lips, a silent command, "Be still." The door caved under the battering ram again, wood breaking like brittle bones. The man rose, rifle poised like a coiled serpent ready to strike. The men surged inside, eyes wild, hearts consumed by ruthless hunger. Fury and desperation tangled in a brutal dance. Gunshots echoed, fists collided, and bodies slammed into the rough timber walls. The man fought like a tempest, every blow thrown with the weight of his promise to protect. The Apache woman moved through the chaos with a shaman's grace and warrior's wrath, each strike infused with the fierce spirits of her people. Men crumpled beneath her blows, cries swallowed by the growing storm. A sudden, piercing scream shattered the battle's grim rhythm. The child's terrified voice slicing through the chaos. The hidden door had cracked open. The boy stumbled, eyes wide and wild, as the jagged edge scraped his skin. His cry ignited the leader's fury anew. Bloodied and burning with hatred, he lunged toward the boy, like a vulture descending on its prey. The man intercepted, slamming the leader back against the floorboards with a savage force. The woman's voice rang out, a clear, ancient call, sharp as a blade, slicing through smoke and fear. The attackers hesitated, faces flashing unease, as if the very forest itself had held its breath in response. "Run!" the man roared, seizing the opening. The woman gathered the child into her arms without hesitation, and together they dashed for the shattered doorway. Outside, the wind whipped fiercely, stirring dust and brittle leaves into a swirling frenzy. From the trees emerged figures cloaked in worn blankets, faces painted with earth and ash. Their eyes burned with the fire of ancient defiance. The land's true guardians had answered the desperate summons. The men faltered, dread flickering cold in their hardened gazes. The veil between mortal and legend thinned beneath the towering peaks that watched silently. A rifle cracked sharply behind them. One of the pursuers fell, clutching a shattered arm, cursing as frost bit into his wound. The man dropped behind a fallen tree trunk, breath ragged, eyes blazing with unyielding resolve. He glanced back at the woman and child, the crushing weight of the battle barely contained within his battered frame. "They won't relent," he muttered, voice raw with exhaustion and fierce devotion. "They'll hunt us till there's nothing left but dust." The woman's gaze was steel, shadowed with dark knowledge. The land shelters us, for now. But a darkness approaches, older and crueler than any man's gun. The child clung tightly to the rough blanket draped over her shoulders, innocence trembling on the edge. Of nightmares. The first pale rays of dawn stretched their unforgiving fingers across jagged mountain peaks, cold and stark. The fragile sanctuary they had known was ash and smoke, swallowed by betrayal and the brutal hunger of men intoxicated by power. Silent footsteps whispered beneath frost-coated branches, soft leather soles brushing earth like a ghost's breath. From the shifting shadows emerged a lone figure, tall and methodical, eyes sharp as a hawk's. Worn leather creaked softly, a silent promise of death. A smoke flare hissed low across the pale sky, an urgent signal cutting through the dawn's fragile hope, calling unseen allies hidden in the gathering mists. The man's heart thundered in his chest as the weight of a new nightmare settled deep within him. The hunt was far from over, and the true storm was only just beginning. The bullet screamed through the cabin like a vengeful spirit, shattering the wall mere inches above their heads. The man dove forward with a grunt, dragging the child down behind the battered wooden table. Splinters rained as the broken door exploded inward, spilling cold gray dawn across the rough floorboards. Shapes poured in, a swarm of grim men in faded coats and battered hats, faces set like stone, eyes burning with relentless hunger. The leader stepped forward, a hulking figure scarred by the wilderness and war. Though clutching his wounded shoulder where the man's shot had found purchase, his gaze was sharp and unyielding, like the steel that had carved these lands. The man's breath came ragged, but steady. Muscles tensed beneath worn leather and weathered flesh, coiled for the storm to come. Against his side, the child whimpered softly, clutching his blanket, innocence trembling amid the thunder of violence. "Hide him," the Apache woman hissed, voice a fragile thread tangled with urgency. Without hesitation, the man swept the boy toward the shadowed corner. There, beneath a loose floorboard, lay a narrow hollow, a secret sanctuary carved from hope and desperate fear. The child's wide eyes, locked with his, flooded with raw terror and faint trust. The man's finger pressed softly to lips, cracked by dust and grit. A silent, solemn command. Be still. The cabin groaned under the next battering wave of the ram. Wood shattered in. Brittle thuds like dying bones. The man rose slowly, rifle leveled, gaze burning with fierce resolve. The men surged inside, a tide of fury and bloodlust. The air thickened with the sharp report of gunfire, the grunt of fists meeting flesh, and the sickening crack of bodies colliding with timber walls. A storm of desperation raged, a tempest born of raw love and survival. The man fought like a cornered beast, every blow a promise made with aching sinews to guard the fragile ember hidden just feet away. The Apache woman moved through the chaos with haunted grace, each strike a whisper of her people's fierce persistence. Men collapsed under strikes, heavy with the weight of ancient spirits, their cries swallowed by the growing roar. Suddenly, a cry sliced through the savage ballet. The child's terrified scream, sharp and thin as a fractured song against the raging night. The hollow's hidden door had shifted, cracked open too wide. The boy stumbled, eyes wild, his small hands scrabbling desperately against the jagged timber edge. His plea ignited the leader's fury anew. Bloodied and fueled by spite, he lunged with the ruthless hunger of a vulture descending on prey. But the man intercepted, slamming the leader back against the floor with brutal force. The woman's voice rang out clear and piercing, an ancient call cleaving smoke and fear like a blade. The attackers faltered, faces flickering with unfamiliar unease. The forest outside seemed to hold its breath, as if the land itself answered, watching from unseen trails. "Run!" the man bellowed, seizing the fragile opening. The woman gathered the child into her arms without hesitation. Together, they burst through the shattered doorway into the cold breath of morning. Outside, the wind howled fiercely, whipping dirt and brittle leaves into a swirling tempest. Figures emerged through the trees, cloaked in worn blankets, faces painted with ash and earth. Their eyes burned with the fire of ancient defiance. The land's true guardians had answered the desperate summons. The pursuers faltered, unease creeping into their hard eyes. The veil between mortal and legend thinned beneath the towering peaks that watched silently, indifferent and eternal. Suddenly, a rifle cracked behind them, sharp as thunder in the frozen air. One of the hunters crumpled, clutching a shattered arm, cursing as blood spilled onto the frostbitten ground. The man slid behind the safety of a fallen tree's broad trunk, breath ragged but burning with unyielding resolve. He cast a glance to the woman and child, the heavy weight of war settling deep into his bones. "They won't relent," he muttered, voice rough with exhaustion and fierce devotion. "They'll hunt us until nothing remains but dust and echoes." Her gaze was steel-tempered by grief and ancient knowledge. "The land shelters us for now," she said softly. "But a darker storm approaches, older and crueler than any gun or man." The child clung to her rough blanket, trembling on the fragile precipice where innocence meets nightmare. Dawn's pale fingers stretched across the jagged mountain peaks, cold and merciless. Their sanctuary was no more, consumed by betrayal, fire, and the unquenchable hunger of men drunk on power. Silent footsteps slipped through the frost-covered brush, soft leather soles brushing the earth like a ghost's breath. From the shadows stepped a lone figure, tall and deliberate, eyes sharp as hawk's talons. Each worn leather creak was a promise. Death was near. A smoke flare hissed low against the pale sky, an urgent signal cutting through the fragile dawn, calling hidden allies from the gathering mists. The man's heart thundered inside his chest as the weight of a new nightmare settled deep and sure. The hunt had only just begun, and beneath the watchful gaze of jagged peaks, a cold whisper slipped through the trees, unseen voice like ice. "The wolves have grown clever, and the prey must learn to run faster still." A bullet tore through the still cabin air, splintering the aged wood mere inches from their heads. The man reacted without hesitation, yanking the child low behind the rough table. Shards of timber scattered as the door exploded inward, spilling cold, pale dawn light across the battered floorboards. Through the fissure came grim-faced men, ghosts of brutality, shaped by this merciless land, their eyes hard as broken stone. Their leader, hulking and scarred like the wilderness itself, staggered forward despite the bleeding wound in his shoulder. His gaze locked on the man, burning with ruthless intent that no injury could dim. Breath ragged but heart steeled, the man tightened his grip on the worn rifle, muscles coiling beneath leather cracked by time. Beside him, the child trembled, small hands clutching the tattered blanket, the fragile ember flickering in a hunger of cold. "Hide him," the Apache woman whispered, voice barely more than a thread, yet laced with fierce urgency. With practiced steadiness born of desperate hope, the man swept the boy toward the shadowed corner, where a hollow beneath loose floorboards awaited, a narrow sanctuary carved from silent prayers and stubborn will. The child's wide eyes flickered up at him, terror and tentative trust colliding in their depths. The man pressed a worn finger to cracked, dust-chafed lips, a silent command not to breathe, not to move. The cabin groaned under the next assault of wood and iron, splinters raining down like bones shattered by fate. Rising, the man leveled his rifle with cold precision. The storm surged inward, men hungry for life or death, the line between hunter and hunted blurred in their wild eyes. Gunshots cracked, fists met flesh with sickening crunches, and bodies slammed hard against the cabin's frail walls. The man fought like a cornered beast, each strike born of a fierce love, a vow sealed in pain. The Apache woman moved through the chaos like a specter summoned from blood and earth, her blows fierce as ancient spirits unleashed. Men crumpled beneath her wrath, their cries swallowed by the rising tempest. Then, a sudden, piercing scream. A raw blade slicing through the bitter chaos. The child, the fragile ember, stumbled as the hidden trapdoor beneath him shifted too wide, jagged edges scraping skin. His eyes, wide with primal terror, met those of the man. The leader's fury roared anew, bloodied hands reaching with the hunger of death's hungry vulture. The man intercepted, slamming the scarred giant back into the broken floor with unforgiving force. The woman's voice cleaved the thick air, a piercing, ancient call that vibrated like a blade through smoke and shadow. The attackers faltered, unease flickering like spectral fire across their faces. The forest beyond held its breath, the ghostly watching of spirits, entwined with wind and stone. "Run!" the man roared, seizing the fragile opening. In one swift motion, the woman cupped the child's trembling form, weaving through the shattered doorway into the cold scythe of morning's breath. Outside, the wind twisted fierce and wild, stirring dust and brittle leaves into a swirling frenzy. Figures cloaked in worn blankets emerged from the broken tree line, faces painted with earth and ash, eyes glimmering with the fire of ancient defiance. The land's true guardians had answered the voiceless summons. Their pursuers hesitated, shadows of dread flickering in their hardened gazes. Between mortal and legend, the veil thinned beneath the silent peaks. A rifle cracked behind them, sharp thunder splitting the frozen air. One of the hunters collapsed, clutching a shattered arm, spitting curses into the biting wind. The man crouched behind a fallen tree's embrace, breath ragged, but eyes blazing with unyielding resolve. His gaze searched the woman and child, the war's crushing weight resting heavy in his chest. "They won't relent," he breathed, voice raw with exhaustion and fierce devotion. "They'll hunt us until dust is all that remains." Her gaze hardened, shadows deepening in her eyes, like cold wells of ancient sorrow. "The land shelters us, for now, but a darker storm approaches," she whispered, "older and crueler than man or spirit." The child clung to her rough blanket, innocence trembling on the knife's edge, where nightmare and hope collide. Dawn stretched pale fingers across jagged peaks, cold and merciless. Their fragile sanctuary, the promise of safety, smoldered in betrayal and fire, devoured by the hunger of men. Drunk on cruelty, beneath frost-laden boughs, silent footsteps whispered, soft leather soles brushing earth like a ghost's breath. From the shadowed mists stepped a lone figure, tall and deliberate, eyes knife-sharp as a hawk's. Each worn creak of leather echoed a grim promise. Death was near. Against heavens, washed in the first cruel light of dawn, a smoke flare hissed low, a twisted signal slicing through fragile hope, calling unseen allies clothed in gathering mist. The man's heart thundered against his ribs as the weight of a new nightmare settled, deep and relentless. The hunt was only beginning, and as the mountains stood sentinel, a voice slipped through the cold trees, a whisper like ice. "The wolves grow clever. The prey must learn to run faster." Still, the man's breath hitched, muscles tensing beneath his worn leather coat, as the bullet's thunder still echoed in his ears. His eyes darted to the shattered doorway, where splinters still clung like cruel fingerprints. The child's scream, raw and shattering, carved through the chaos, a fragile cry amid the storm. Instinct seized him, and with a tug, he yanked the Apache woman close, their bodies moving as one through the shattered threshold into the biting cold of dawn. The forest greeted them with a howl, wild, raw, as if the land itself mourned the violence that had stained its soul. Trees stood tall and silent, their naked branches clawing at a sky still bruised by night. Beneath the brittle frost, footsteps gathered, shadows emerging, eyes aflame with ancestral fire. Cloaked figures stepped from the thicket, their faces adorned with ash and earth, their presence simultaneously terrifying and sacred. The spirits of the land had answered the desperate summons. The man's hand instinctively gripped the child's small frame, shielding him from the biting wind and the unknown threats lurking beyond. His pulse thundered, rattling the fragile calm that had briefly settled. Behind them, the ragged breach of the cabin stood as a tomb to what little sanctuary they had once known, a place now claimed by blood and betrayal. A sudden crack broke the charged silence. A rifle report snapped like a whip, and a man tumbled behind gnarled roots, clutching a shattered arm. Curses hissed into the frost's cold. Grip, the attackers wavered, unease washing over hardened faces like an unexpected tide. The man slid behind a fallen trunk, breath ragged but resolve sharpened like steel. Darkness pressed close on every side, men relentless, and shadows older than memory. "We aren't safe yet," he rasped, voice fierce despite exhaustion. "They'll hunt us down until nothing's left to hide." The woman's gaze hardened, eyes reflecting the fierce resilience carved into her very bones. "The land veils us now," she whispered, "but a darkness stirs, an ancient hunger the spirits dare not face." The child nestled between them, clutching her rough blanket, a fragile flicker amid encroaching night. His wide eyes, bright with fear, searched theirs for the promise of safety they both struggled to offer. The first pale light caressed jagged peaks, its brittle fingers stretching thin across the cold landscape. The sanctuary burned behind them, a ghost swallowed in smoke and ash. Betrayal's bitter taste lingered in the frozen air, mixing with the sharp tang of blood and desperate hope. Beneath frost-laden boughs, soft steps brushed the earth like whispers. From the mist emerged a lone figure, tall and deliberate, boots worn leather and eyes sharp as a hawk's strike. Silent as death, he surveyed the broken trail left behind, a predator born of shadow and cunning. A sputtering flare hissed low against the pale sky, a signal slicing through fragile dawn. Reinforcements coming. The hunt had only just begun. The man's knuckles whitened around the child's clenched hand. As the cold dread settled deep, there was no turning back now. And from the trembling silence between the trees, a chilling whisper curled like smoke. "Run, little ones. The wolves have learned new paths, and the night is growing teeth." The cold morning air bit sharply as the man crouched behind the fallen tree, the rifle heavy in his hands, but steady. His eyes never left the figures ahead, those dark-coated men who had chased them through the night, now hesitating at the threshold between mortal menace and ancient power. Beside him, the Apache woman held the child close, her breath steady despite the storm clawing at their heels. For a long moment, silence stretched taut between them, broken only by the whispering wind, weaving through skeletal branches. "They won't give up," he said, voice low but resolute. "Not until there's nothing left to hide." She nodded, eyes sharp with a fierce light, not extinguished by years of sorrow. "The land shelters us now, but soon we must face more than men. There is a darkness stirring, worse than any gunpowder or rage." Her fingers tightened around the child's blanket, offering a shield woven from heritage and hope. The child, fragile yet brave, looked up, his wide eyes reflecting the mountain's first pale light, as if seeking solace in something older than himself. The promise the man had made, to protect this small life against all odds, now burned fiercer than ever. He eased forward, voice barely a whisper. "We cannot stay." Together, they slipped through the narrow paths the forest granted to those who knew its language, the woman moving with ghostly certainty, the man alert to every shadow and sound. The chill gnawed at their bones, but the urgency pushed them on, beneath jagged peaks, now bathed in forgiving dawn. Behind them, the ruins of the cabin lay smoldering, a testament to shattered safety and the costs of trust in a land ruthless and wild. Hours passed in a tense crawl through frost-crisped underbrush, until they reached a hidden glade nestled between towering pines. The air here held a stillness swollen with unseen watchers, Apache spirits, guardians of earth and wind. The woman knelt, laying the child gently on a bed of moss, her voice soft, thrumming with reverence. "Here," she said, "is a place where old wounds may find healing, where the spirits still hold their watch." The man sank to his knees beside her, worn hands tracing the faint symbols carved into stones half swallowed by moss and time. Memories flooded back, whispered teachings, the intertwined fates of land and people, a fragile alliance forged in blood and sacrifice. He met the woman's gaze, the weight of their shared past heavy between them. "Why bring the child here?" he asked softly, a trace of wonder threading his words. "Because he carries the blood of two worlds," she answered, voice thick with a bittersweet edge. "His survival means more than life. It is a bridge, a chance for wounds too, close where hatred once burned." They sat in silence, the child sleeping like a fragile ember beneath the dappled canopy. The hours wore on, and distant voices stirred, harsh, angry sounds carried on the wind. The hunters had not given up, but as the man reached for his rifle, the woman raised a hand, silencing him. "They come hunting for more than blood today. They hunt for the end of what we are. But here, in the heart of the old land, the spirits will not let us fall easily." As twilight deepened, a pale glow began to gather among the trees, faint shapes rising like smoke, elders wrapped in blankets of sage and bark, eyes gleaming with hard-won wisdom and fierce protection. Around there, small refuge, a circle formed, an ancient ward against darkness and death. The man lowered his rifle, muscles loosening for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. He drew a slow breath and looked to the woman. "This fight, it's bigger than I thought. But here, perhaps we find a chance." Her smile was a wan thing, but fierce, hope carved from the harsh edges of reality. A chance for peace, but peace takes courage. The kind you've shown, the kind the child will need. Night fell fully, draping the forest in velvet hush. The child's rising breath was steady now, secure beneath the watchful vigil. The man settled beside them, shoulders weary but spirit unbroken. In that sacred stillness, beneath the stars worn like scars across the sky, the bonds forged through fear and fight finally found their home. The hunters would come again, but for now, the land had whispered its promise of shelter, and the spirits stood tall, guardians of new beginnings. Dawn would break over a world forever changed, where the child, bearer of a legacy entwined with two fierce peoples, could grow beneath a sky no longer shadowed only by threat, but brightened by hope. And as the mountains held their silent watch, a final breath settled across the land, soft, enduring, unyielding. The story had found its rest. The wolves might have grown clever, but here, beneath ancient trees and timeless stars, the hunted were no longer prey. They were the beginning,